let's check out the new video from your man and my man, the internet's friend, Bradley Hall, a fantastic, hilarious, and very talented guitar YouTuber. I like his opinions and his videos quite a bit. This is called, Is Metal Better or Worse Than It Used to Be? I haven't watched this, but I have a feeling that he's probably more into classic metal, I think. So my guess is he's going to say that metal is worse now than it used to be, but we'll see. And it just so happens by coincidence that I am wearing my Slayer shirt today, so you know that I'm a real headbanger. And so therefore, you can trust my opinions. Let's see what he has to say.
Modern metal, classic metal. You've got the people that like the classic stuff, and you've got the people that like the modern stuff. And you know, there doesn't seem to be too much overlap these days.
It's true. The modern metal, classic metal, poor Bradley, still trapped in the UK's tea shortage. Poor guy. Listen, hit the GoFundMe link in the description and donate a few dollars to help Bradley buy some teas. The letter T in short supply over there.
Classic metal fans say that metal these days is boring and uninspired and all sounds the same. Modern metal fans say that classic metal is like unlistenable because the mixes suck, the guitar playing is dated, and
it's really unfortunate to me. Like, he's right that people say that classic metal sucks because the mixes are bad. That's such a weird way to listen to music to me. To like focus on the mix more than the song or what they're trying to say is a really strange way to listen to music. Like, it's very rare for me that like the mix is so bad that it ruins a great song, you know. But to use another example, behind him he's got the Misfits. Old like Danzig era Misfits has some of the worst production you will ever hear. They can barely play their instruments, but the songs and the performances are amazing. So I don't know. We'll see what he has to say, but I think it's a shame if anybody lets a mix ruin their enjoyment of a song.
Cheesy. But who's right? So in this video, I've taken 5 things that I love and hate about both modern and classic metal to show you guys there are amazing things about both of them. It doesn't have to be one or the other.
What? We can like both? No! This is the internet. You have to like everything or hate everything. You fence sitter. I thought you were a real headbanger. Now I see you're just a fence sitter.
I do hope you guys enjoy my takes, and I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments down below. What do you love and hate about classic and modern metal?
Disclaimer, the points made in this video are obviously sweeping generalizations. He spelled generalizations wrong. This is the English spelling. We speak American here. There are, of course, many amazing bands, both new and old, that these don't apply to. It's unfortunate that he has to put a disclaimer in a video where he's going to express what I'm sure are some very mild opinions, but that's the world we live in. You got to put a disclaimer before you say anything.
So first up, let's start with what I love about modern metal.
Okay. Amazing mixing. I agree with that.
So many of my favorite classic metal albums are completely marred by horrendous audio quality.
I guess, like he mentioned Carcass, Recapitulation. I think that sounds great. Like those old death metal records would sound bad to me with modern production, but you know, I'm probably in the minority of that.
Which even sometimes puts me off listening to.
No, see, I love the production on Altars of Madness. I think it sounds great. But again, I'm old and I'm probably in the minority on that.
Thankfully, production quality has come a long way in the past couple of decades.
It's true.
So band songs can now be given the mixes they deserve and are now tighter, cleaner, and more face-crushing than they ever have been.
Yeah, this is true. That's true. I agree with that. And musicians are insanely good. That is true. I mean, well, let's see what he has to say.
It's actually insane how exponentially fast musicians have improved at their craft over the years.
Absolutely.
Unlike previous generations that had to rely on questionable tab books, lesson videotapes, and meticulously slowing vinyl records down to learn their favorite licks.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, I learned from guitar magazines back in the day, and I didn't really know, like sometimes I wouldn't really know if I was playing the song right or not because you couldn't really tell on the recording. Like, I think I'm playing it, but it's true. The level of like playing now in modern musicians is insane. Like I remember back when I was trying to start bands, you know, in the late 90s, early 2000s, it was hard to find a drummer that could play double bass at all. Like it was difficult to find a drummer that even owned a double bass pedal, let alone that could actually like play it well. And now every random 16-year-old on YouTube like rips. So I completely agree with this. The level of like musicianship now is off the charts. I don't know if I would say the level of songwriting is better, but people can definitely play way better.
The internet has sped up the learning process an infinite amount.
Yep.
Interactive sheet music, YouTube
Absolutely.
videos, and Zoom lessons with anyone in the world has allowed musicians to progress on their instrument far, far quicker than their predecessors.
All that, I 100% agree with that. Making music is so accessible, okay?
Thanks to the advancements and increased accessibility of home recording, literally anyone can set up their own home studio these days and get creating.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, he's showing this thing here, this old 4-track recorder. This is like a pretty nice one too. You know, back then in the 90s, 2000s, to get like a decent home studio would cost you thousands of dollars. Now you could get a Focusrite audio interface like the one I have. I think it's like $150, and that's enough to get you started and make a perfectly decent recording with that, and amp sims and everything. I think it's amazing. It's never been a better time to be a musician as far as like the ease of production.
Literally anyone can set up their own home studio these days and get creating. Knowledge of proper recording and mixing techniques is also now much more widespread, instead of only being in the...
Hey, there we go. There we go. Thank you, Bradley. This is my business partner and one of my best friends, A.L. Levy, talking to Devin Townsend as part of Nail the Mix, which is the company that I'm a partner in. Bradley, thank you for giving us some love. I appreciate it.
Hands of gurus like it used to be. Hell, you don't even need a backbreaking amp setup or physical drum kit anymore. Literally every audio tool you could ever need can be installed on a laptop.
Reaper people. Breakdowns. Okay, well, I'm surprised. So Bradley is listing breakdowns as a positive. I didn't think he was a breakdowns kind of guy.
Not a lot to say here, really. Nothing beats a sequence of filthy low zeros that make you burn so hard it looks like you just smelt my post-bean binging flatulence.
Breakdowns are cool. I would say at the same time, though, I feel like we've maybe gone a little bit overboard with breakdowns. Like, breakdowns are not a song, but I agree, breakdowns are cool.
In my opinion, one of the more interesting developments of modern metal is the trend of bands not being interested in being defined by a single genre. Artists such as Sleep Token, Poppy, Falling in Reverse, Avenged Sevenfold, and Polyphia have all achieved significant popularity with incredibly adventurous, genre-bending sounds, which would have been relegated to relative obscurity if they came out in previous decades.
I feel like people just don't care about genre anymore. Like musicians, fans, like genres don't matter anymore. Because nowadays everybody grew up with access to like all the music ever. So nobody cares what genre you are now. You know what I mean? Nobody cares. Just make whatever music you want. And if it's cool, people will listen to it.
This is inspiring to me as it shows that, contrary to what many rock and metal fans might think, artists are still hungry to innovate and do something fresh. And now, what I dislike about modern metal.
What he dislikes. Okay.
With modern production techniques, it's far easier, quicker, and cheaper to record everything to a grid, ensuring...
See, here's what I'm offended by, is that he's copying and pasting this MIDI sequence instead of looping it. And he's using Reaper, which is bad too, but come on, Bradley, just, you can loop it. What are you doing here?
All the instruments are perfectly quantized. The only problem is, when all instruments are locked in and metronomically tight, it can definitely lose some of the groove and energy you get from natural imperfection.
I mean, that's totally true. I completely agree with this. And a lot of the bands that you think are the tightest are the ones who don't use a click, who don't record, who don't edit everything to a grid. For example, Meshuggah, the first Meshuggah, well, not the first Meshuggah album, but the first popular Meshuggah album, Destroy, Erase, Improve, which is from 95, I think. That's recorded without a click track. And if you were to actually do a tempo map, you would see that the tempo actually moves a little bit. I totally agree with that. Like, as big of a fan as I am of modern production, I think there's a place where it goes too far, and you absolutely lose the life of a recording if you over edit it. And, you know, just using everyone using the same samples and the same amp tones and stuff. I completely agree on that.
There's a reason why musicians in genres such as funk, reggae, and punk purposefully rush or drag behind the beats, as it makes the music sound far more human.
Sounds good. People like it. Harder to be original.
It only makes sense that the more the years go by and the more music gets released, the harder and harder it becomes to sound original. The bigger the pool of music that's gone before you, the more likely it is you'll sound derivative of someone else, be it...
I mean, I think about this all the time with metal and rock in general. I kind of think, like, what is there left to do? And I'm not saying that as like a criticism of anything. It's just like, man, we've been making rock for 70 years now, right? Maybe 80. What can you do with rock that hasn't been done before? You know what I mean? I don't know. I mean, somebody will come along with something, I guess, but it's in almost any genre. Like, I just wonder, what is there left to do in any genre? But especially metal. We've made it as extreme as we could. We've made it as accessible as we could. What is there left to do? It's very, very, very difficult to be original. Absolutely agree with that.
Knowingly or unknowingly. The home recording boom has completely saturated the market, which results in a ton of cookie-cutter copies, with many bands all using the same few guitar and drum plugins in their recordings.
Yeah, this is true, and I agree with that. However, this was even more true back in the day. So he's saying everyone uses the same plugins now, and that's true. But back in the day, like the 80s and the 90s and all those classic metal recordings, everybody used the same shit back then. They used Marshalls and like Mesa Boogies, and like that's kind of really about it. You know, in the 80s, it was all Marshalls. So there were even less options back then. So in my opinion, it's not about using the same plugins. It's about everyone using them in the same way. Everyone is chasing the same sounds. And that's the issue, in my personal opinion. But I do agree that a lot of it kind of sounds the same.
Of course, there's no denying that these plugins sound sick. There's a reason why they're so popular. But it's incredibly rare these days for musicians to take risks with their tone and do something different. But I can't really blame them, to be honest, as convenience will come out on top 9 times out of 10.
And let's be real. You know, the Tube Screamer 5150 Mesa cabinet sounds pretty fucking great, right? Like, I wouldn't do anything other than that. Like, if you want a heavy guitar sound, I mean, you're not going to do any better than that, most likely. You know what I mean? But don't fix it if it ain't broke, you know?
For all the amazing progress and advancements that modern metal has made, it's unfortunate that the art of songwriting has somewhat been left on the wayside. Exciting chord progressions, tasty hooks, and cohesive structures are often left on the wayside in favor of needlessly complicated riffs, predictable bargain bin melodies, and wanky, bloated song structures.
I mean, I've complained about this a million times, so you guys don't need to hear me complain about it again. But I completely agree. Joey Sturgis is to blame. He dialed in those tones like crazy, but when he did it fresh, it sounded great. Well, Joey Sturgis is another one of my business partners and a good friend of mine. I was in Joey Sturgis's wedding, so you will never hear me say a bad thing about Joey. I love him and his work. I would say it's the Joey copycats that are to blame. Joey was an innovator. He changed the fucking game, period. Like, Joey changed metal in terms of production more than probably anybody else. It's not his fault that everyone tried to copy him. You know, Joey did Joey. Everyone else just ripped him off.
This is
no fun allowed. Well, okay, I agree with this one.
My biggest gripe with a lot of modern metal, there's just not a lot of fun left. Maybe it's a result of the times we live in, but metal is so damn miserable and unself-aware these days, it's almost laughable. It's interesting to me that metal has sort of followed the trend of contemporary pop music, where it's more about vibes and mood and less about melody and so.
I mean, you're not going to hear me disagreeing about this, but again, I've complained about this a million times, so I'll let Bradley be the one to criticize metal for a change. How about that?
Songs. Classic metal. What do I love about it?
Okay. More organic sound.
A while ago, I was thinking about why a lot of older metal records sound so much more energetic than modern releases. And I'm almost certain that it's due to bands not recording to a click in the studio like they do these days.
I mean, I agree with that. And no editing. Those old 80s bands, there's no click, there's no editing. I mean, there's a little bit of editing, but you couldn't, like nowadays, if you miss one note in a riff, you can copy and paste that note in, right? And you can move everything onto a grid. But back in the day, when you're recording to tape, even as recently as like the 90s, a lot of people didn't use clicks. Like, for example, Cynic, their first album, Focus, which is from 92, I think. Sean Reinert, rest in peace, told me that they recorded that live in the studio without a fucking click. Can you fucking believe that? And they were like 19 when they did that. That is fucking unbelievable. To record that shit live in the studio without a click, like zero fucking bands now could do that. That is fucking absurd. And I do think we have lost something from that. They've changed tempos quite. Yes, the tempo drifts all over the place on that album, which is part of the reason why it sounds good.
Not recording to a click gave bands an awesome push and pull feel that really brought grooves to life. Take the verse riff of Master of Puppets as an example. The B section of that riff could technically be counted as something like 11/16, I guess. But at the time, the band obviously weren't counting that. They were just like playing it by feel in the room. This is definitely the sort of thing that's missing from modern metal, with bands too scared to break free of quantization.
Yeah, I agree with that. To me, it's like if you recorded a gent album with classic metal production, it would sound stupid, right? So I don't think that the new style of like super tight, I'll say sterile production, but like that style sounds good for certain kinds of music, right? I think it sounds terrible when, like, if you listen to like a thrash band, like from like Creator or whatever, if you listen to the new Creator albums, I think they sound terrible because it's an old style of music. With new production, it sounds bad to me. And the reverse is true too. If you played modern metal with classic metal production, I think it would also sound bad. So I don't think one is better than the other. It's just about choosing what's appropriate, in my opinion.
While musicians these days
aren't bands pressured to record with a click track once they reach a certain threshold of fame, they don't have to do anything. I mean, they're paying the producer. They can do whatever the fuck they want. So you can't force a band to record with a click track. Like, they're paying the producer. So if you say, we don't want to use a click track, fuck off, then, you know, it's not like the producer can put a gun to your head and make you use a click track. And you should have that conversation ahead of time, too.
Days are without a doubt light years ahead of the average musician from the classic days. There's still a certain facet of playing that these older guys excelled at. Going into the studio to record an album used to be a huge deal and was incredibly expensive. Therefore, it was imperative that bands were efficient with their time. Editing was also a lot more tricky and less time efficient than it is today. So musicians had to know all of their parts absolutely in.
Yeah, this is something that people may not know is a lot of metal bands show up at the studio without ever having played the entire song before. They've just like recorded it in a few riffs here and there. Maybe they wrote it in Guitar Pro. Like, it's not a rare thing for a metal band to show up at the studio now without ever having played the entire song front to back before. Obviously, that's not going to sound the best. If you're playing it for the first time in the studio, probably not a good thing.
Inside out before recording, as there simply wasn't time to sit around waiting 100 takes for the drummer to nail that one fill. Because of the immense pressure this created, musicians from this time were generally inhumanly tight and well rehearsed compared to those today who know that they can fall back on edits.
Yep, he's right.
Even
more memorable
though there were, of
solos.
course, still plenty of pointless technical
I don't care about
guitar
solos
acrobatics in bygone eras of metal. Overall, however, I do feel that a lot more thought was put into.
I mean, I feel like bands hardly even play, maybe like the kind of like European metal stuff that Bradley listens to, you know, like real metal, but I hardly ever even hear solos at all anymore, which is fine with me. You know, Dimebag is one of the few people that to me played solos that were actually musical. I'm okay with the lack of solos personally.
Guitar solos compared to today. And when I say more
breakdowns have
thought,
replaced
I don't mean
solos.
in terms
That's true.
Of theory and technique and spending hours writing out the perfect licks in Guitar Pro. I mean more in terms of making sure that they'd be memorable. And even when guitarists from these bands were doing flashy shit, I agree with that. It usually still felt super fun and part of the song. Not just like, okay, now here's the bit where the guitarist shows off for literally no reason.
There we go, Michelangelo. Rockstar stories.
Whether you like them or not,
okay.
The larger-than-life rock star personalities of the past will be passed on into legend and remembered for years to come.
I mean, this is true. You know, let's look at Loudwire right now. We've got Tool, Metallica, Van Halen, Metallica, Bring Me the Horizon, Creed, Bon Jovi, Guns N' Roses, a lot of these older personalities, more Van Halen, David Lee Roth, a lot of these older personalities because, you know, for better or for worse, there really isn't anybody who's come along that's more compelling than these people, right? So I think a lot of these old school rock stars are kind of douchebags, and like I'm not on board with their lifestyle and the way they treat their fans, and like I think that stuff's a little bit much. But it's definitely true that there is not a new generation of stars to replace them.
Regardless of your opinions on people like Ozzy
Ronnie
Osbourne,
Radke,
Dave Mustaine, or Richie Blackmore, you can't deny that they have some super entertaining stories from their debauched past.
True.
And even though I personally prefer the fact that most musicians are way more grounded and sensible these days, I do admit that it's a shame that the rock and metal world doesn't really have many of these ridiculous kind of characters anymore.
Yeah, I agree with that. I'm not into the rock star thing, but from a marketability perspective, it definitely matters. Producers, okay.
Do you think that the enormous success of Metallica's Black Album or Slayer's Reign in Blood were entirely due to the bands themselves? Of course not. It was nearly wholly down to the world-class producers they collaborated.
Well, I don't know if I would say wholly down to them, but they certainly deserve credit. I totally agree with that.
With. A producer's job is to take the band songs and shape them to their full
God, with this creepy scene from Ghost.
Potential, helping the band incorporate additional ideas and sounds that they wouldn't otherwise have thought of. With a lot of modern bands choosing to self-produce due to the comparative ease of recording these days, I feel like many albums and songs don't get realized to their full potential.
Yeah, I mean, that's true. And even producers now are mostly not really producers. They're like mix engineers. Like, a producer is not just the person who records and mixes it. A producer, in the true sense of the word, really kind of helps craft the song and the arrangement and helps like make it be the best thing it can be. And producer now typically just means the person who records it. And it's true because there's just no money for producers anymore. Because, you know, back then, a mediocre major label band might get a budget of, you know, a couple $100,000. That doesn't happen anymore. You know, like most of these metal bands you're hearing, a bigger metal band might get a budget of, you know, 50 or I'm not talking like Slipknot, but, you know, maybe a budget of like 50 or 60 grand for the type of band that would, you know, play on the second line of like a big festival these days.
I know it sounds harsh,
there's no money
but
for
there's
it.
very, very few bands throughout history who were talented enough to become massively successful entirely off their own backs. Collaboration is an incredibly crucial aspect of creativity, and it's not something that bands should shun. And now,
okay,
what I dislike about classic metal.
Oh, what I dislike about classic metal. All right, let's see. Horrible mixing. I like that.
There are so many older metal albums that I'd listen to a whole lot more if it wasn't for them having such borderline, unlistenable mixing. Especially after
I like that shit. But I'm old. I like modern mixes. I like old mixes. I think they're both cool, but I really like a lot of these old mixes. I think they sound awesome.
Spoiled by how amazing a lot of modern albums sound, it just makes it harder to revisit the classics sometimes. You can't entirely blame the time period either, because there are plenty of examples of old albums that still sound super good.
Yeah, there's tons of them that sound great. I would argue that the mixes of the 90s and 2000s, I would argue were still the best. Because that's like sort of the very end of the analog era when people were recording analog but mixing digital, you know, those hybrid workflows. I think that shit sounds untouchable. You know, like Blink or Limp Bizkit or Pantera. Like, to me, those are still like the best sounding mixes, in my opinion.
Many bands were unfortunately just limited by budgets and all the capabilities of the people they worked with.
The aesthetics.
This is probably going to be a personal taste thing, but man, I just can't get behind the aesthetics of a lot of old...
What do I think of the production on Injustice for All? I think it needs bass guitar. I know that's like such a corny ass boomer thing to say, but Injustice for All needs bass guitar. It sounds too thin. Other than that, I think it's really good, but it needs bass guitar.
Old metal bands. A lot of the pre-mid-90s stuff is...
Hey now, you leave Manowar's name out of your mouth, buddy. How dare you talk shit on Joey DeMaio's leather thong? How dare you? You're not fit to touch this man's chest hair.
It's just too much for me. I think this is partly the reason that puts many younger people off checking out classic bands. They just take a single glance at their promo shots or music videos and be like, what the bloody hell is that?
I mean, understandable, right?
Mate.
Bands getting shafted.
Back in the classic days of metal, the music industry was a far different beast to what...
Well, he cut this chart off at 2017. What you don't see, if you were to zoom out to 2023, you would see this number going up quite a bit. So I don't know if that was on purpose or not, but this chart doesn't really tell an accurate story. You can see 2017 is where this cuts off.
What it is now. If you wanted to make it as a band, then you pretty much had no choice but to sign to a label and submit to whatever dubious terms they offered you. Because of this, it was pretty commonplace for bands to end up locked into horrible deals and often ended up losing most or all of their revenue. As an example, at the start of their career, Children of Bodom had to go as far as faking a breakup and changing their name just so they could void their original contract.
I mean, that kind of shit still happens now, but it seems like it probably did happen more back then.
Younger fans who are used to the more refined...
There we go. Your man Charles from Buried Alive. In my opinion, if you're into just like straight up shred, like shit that like an alien would play, it never even seemed possible that somebody could do this shit on a guitar. This is your man right here. Charles Caswell of Buried Alive. Fucking genius.
refined style of contemporary guitar playing are likely to find the older styles used by classic bands a bit underwhelming and dated.
Boomer bends.
Boomer bends.
Like I mentioned earlier, this point is definitely a double-edged sword. Even though it can be fun hearing stories about rock star antics of the past, there's no escaping the fact that a lot of these personalities were extremely unlikable, detestable individuals. I'm pretty glad that they...
That's my thought on these like old school rock stars. I'm just like, dude, I don't give a fuck how much you drank or how many girls you banged in 1986. Like, I don't give a shit. Like, I'm not impressed. I don't give a fuck about your fucking rock star stories. And you read these fucking like memoirs of these like old school rockers, and I just could not give less of a fuck about all their fucking dumb stories.
Music industry has mellowed out considerably in recent decades, as it's not healthy for young musicians to have such narcissistic, overly debauched, unwholesome rapscallions as idols. So what do you think? Agree? Disagree?
Okay. Well, I mean, I think I agree with all his points. As always, Bradley Hall coming in with some great content. My only criticism is that he's a fence sitter. Bradley Hall, this is YouTube. You can't take a reasonable, nuanced look at something and admit that there are some good parts and some bad parts. No, this is YouTube. You have to take a stand. You have to love it or hate it. There is no middle ground. So for that reason, I give this video a thumbs down. Bradley Hall, this video is trash. But in all seriousness, Bradley Hall is great. Give him a sub. Check out this video. And yeah, I like Bradley. Modern metal. Classic metal